Round the World Lit Audio. Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Episode 3, By the River, The Ferryman, Sansara, Full Narration Script. Channel Intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week. Free to listen. Chapter Recap. In Episode 2, Siddhartha sat under a tree after leaving the Buddha, and the world simply became itself. The tree was a tree, the bird was a bird, everything present and complete. He walked into the city. He saw Kamala and followed her to her garden gate. He told Swami, I can think, I can wait, I can fast. He learned commerce and love. The years passed. He wore fine clothes and gambled and drank and watched himself becoming the childlike people he had observed with such careful distance. He dreamed of Kamala's dead songbird in its golden cage. He thought, that bird is me. He left the city in the night and walked toward the river. Episode 3. By the River, The Ferryman, and Sansara. By the river. He came to the river. It was the same river he had crossed years before, when he had left the Samanas and gone with Govinda to find the Buddha. A boatman had taken them across in a flatboat, and Siddhartha had felt, in the crossing, something he could not name. Something that made him want to stay longer at the river than the crossing required. He had not stayed then. He had been on his way somewhere. Now he was not on his way anywhere. He was a man who had left everything for the second time. Left his father's house and the Samanas and the Buddha. Left Kamala and Swami and the city, and was standing at the river with nothing and nowhere to go, and the specific emptiness of someone who has tried everything available to them, and has not found what they were looking for. He sat at the river. He looked at the water. The water moved. It moved continuously, without stopping, with the specific quality of something that has been moving for a very long time and intends to continue. It came from somewhere, and was going somewhere, and where it came from and where it was going were both beyond the visible range. And what was present was only this: the movement, the sound, the surface that caught the light and released it continuously. He listened. He had been a man who learned by listening, had listened to his father, and to Vishwamitra, and to the Samanas, and to the Buddha, and to Kamala, and to Swami, and to the river of the city's life. Now he listened to the river. The river said not in words. The river did not speak in words. It said in the way that all running water says which is the sound of the sacred syllable that contains all sounds, the vibration that underlies all vibration, the hum of being itself. Siddhartha had been taught this as a child and had understood it as a concept. He now heard it as a sound. He wept. He had been weeping a great deal in the past several days, the weeping of a person whose defenses have been stripped away, whose cleverness and whose distance and whose practice and whose commerce have all been stripped away, leaving the person who was always underneath them, who had always been there, who was not Siddhartha the Brahmin's son, or Siddhartha the ascetic, or Siddhartha the lover, or Siddhartha the merchant, but simply the one who was all of those. He wept, and the weeping was clean. He slept. He slept at the river's edge with the specific depth of someone whose body has been given permission to stop, not the sleep of exhaustion but the sleep of arrival, the sleep of someone who has reached the place where sleeping is possible. He woke. A man was sitting nearby, watching him with the alert stillness of someone who has been sitting in one place for a long time, and has learned to be fully present in whatever that place is. The man was old and weathered in the way of people who live outdoors, not damaged, but worn smooth, like a stone in the river. His name was Vasudeva. He was a ferryman. He said, when Siddhartha woke, did you fall asleep at my river? Siddhartha said, I came from the city. I am going nowhere. I sat at the river and fell asleep. Vasudeva said, it is a good river to sleep at. He offered to take Siddhartha across. Siddhartha said, I have no money. Vasudeva said, that doesn't matter. They crossed. Siddhartha watched Vasudeva pull the boat and was struck by something about the man, a quality of presence that he had encountered before only once, in the grove at Jetavana, when he had seen the Buddha. Not the same presence. Vasudeva was not enlightened in the way the Buddha was enlightened, or if he was, it expressed itself differently, more quietly, without the cosmic authority of the awakened one. But there was something in Vasudeva that had been settled in a way that most people's spirits are not settled. He said, have you also learned from the river? Vasudeva said, yes. He said, will you teach me? Vasudeva said, the river will teach you. I have learned from it. You will learn from it. Everyone learns differently from it, because everyone brings different questions. He said, stay with me if you like. I need help with the boat. Siddhartha stayed. The ferryman. He became a ferryman. He and Vasudeva worked together, pulled the boat back and forth across the river, took passengers and their goods and their animals, cooked simple food and slept in simple shelter, and lived the life of two men whose occupation was to help people cross water. It was the most ordinary life he had ever lived. He had been a Brahmin's son, and an ascetic and a merchant and a lover, and each of those lives had a specific quality of importance, of being oriented toward something larger than itself. This life had no such orientation. It was what it was. The river moved. The boat crossed. People were taken from one bank to the other. The day ended. Another began. He learned from the river. He learned, slowly, over years, the things that Vasudeva had told him the river would teach. He learned that the river had no time, that all of it, the water that had passed and the water that was passing, and the water that was coming, was present simultaneously, was all the same river, was all the same moment experienced at different points, along a continuum that had no beginning and no end. He learned that the voice of the river contained every voice, the voice of joy and the voice of suffering, the laughter and the lamentation, all of them simultaneously, all of them the river, none of them separate from the others. He learned that Siddhartha the ferryman and Siddhartha the Brahmin's son, and Siddhartha the ascetic and Siddhartha the lover, and Siddhartha the merchant were not different people, but different facets of one person, one Siddhartha, and that this person had always been present even when Siddhartha thought he had lost himself. He had not lost himself in the city, he had found more of himself there, had found the parts of himself that were capable of desire and loss and the specific suffering of someone who is everything, and is not satisfied, and these parts were also him, were also Siddhartha, were necessary components of the understanding he was arriving at. He arrived at it slowly. Vasudeva watched and said very little. He said, when he did speak, things that contained a great deal in very few words, the speech of someone who has learned that language is most useful, when it is most compressed, that the river communicates everything in and that is one syllable. Sansara, and Kamala's arrival. Then Kamala came. She came across the river on a pilgrimage. She had given up the life of the city after Siddhartha left, had given up the courtesan's art, and the garden and the beautiful house, and had become a follower of the Buddha, had joined the community of those who followed the awakened one and lived simply, and traveled to the places associated with his life. She came with her son. Her son was a boy of perhaps 10 years, a boy of surpassing beauty, with the specific quality of a child, who has been raised with every material advantage, and is not aware of it, who has the ease and the confidence of someone, for whom the world has always been arranged. The boy was Siddhartha's son. He had not known. Kamala had not told him. She had discovered the pregnancy after his departure, and had raised the boy alone, and the boy had grown up knowing his father only as an absence, a gap in the story that Kamala had declined to explain fully. She was crossing the river on her pilgrimage when a snake bit her. It was a small brown snake, the specific kind that strikes without warning and injects venom, that works quickly. By the time Vasudeva had pulled the boat to the bank, and they had carried her to the shelter, she was dying. Siddhartha sat beside her. She knew who he was. She recognized him, older now, weathered by the river and the years, but the same eyes, the same quality of presence, that had made her stop at the garden gate, when he spoke to her years before. She said, I knew I would find you again, Siddhartha. He said, yes, I am here. She said, the boy. His name is young Siddhartha. He is yours. He looked at the boy who was standing apart, frightened and trying not to show it, with the specific dignity of a child, who has not been taught to be afraid. He looked at Kamala. She said, I am not afraid. Not anymore. I practiced while I was with you. I learned from you how to think and how to wait. I learned from the Buddha that life does not end. She died in the evening. Siddhartha sat beside her through the night. The boy sat apart, watching, not weeping, not because he had no feeling, but because he had not been taught to express feeling, and was not sure how. The boy was proud and spoiled and beautiful and alone, and Siddhartha looked at him, and felt the specific love of a father, who has never been a father, the love that arrives fully formed, and does not require time to develop. He thought, I have a son. He thought, I am beginning again. Episode transition. You have reached the end of episode 3 of Siddhartha, by Hermann Hesse. The river has taught. Vasudeva has witnessed. Kamala has died and the son has arrived. In the final episode, the son who does not want what Siddhartha has found, who rebels, who leaves, and the great conversation between Siddhartha and Govinda at the end of everything, when the old friend arrives and asks what Siddhartha has learned and Siddhartha tries to say what cannot be said. Episode 4 is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new episode arrives every week.